In August 1963, a gang of about 15 guys, most of them small-time crooks who'd never pulled off anything bigger than a jewelry shop job, stopped a train in the English countryside, robbed it in under 20 minutes, and walked away with the modern equivalent of over 50 million pounds. Then most of them got caught within weeks, because they hid out at a farmhouse and forgot to wipe their fingerprints off a Monopoly board. Yeah. Let's talk about the Great Train Robbery. Picture Britain in 1963. The Beatles haven't hit America yet. James Bond movies are brand new. And in London, there's a small, loosely connected criminal underworld of guys who know guys who know guys. Our main character is Bruce Reynolds. Smooth, ambitious, saw himself less as a criminal and more as a gentleman thief. Think if a heist film director decided to just become the heist. Reynolds pulls together a crew. Buster Edwards, Charlie Wilson, Gordon Goody, Roy James, nicknamed the Weasel, also a genuinely talented race car driver, which becomes relevant later, and a locksmith named Ronnie Biggs, who, quick preview, is not important to this robbery at all, yet becomes the most famous name attached to it. We'll get to why. It's a wild ride. There's also a tip from a mystery source the gang nicknamed the Ulsterman, believed to be a postal worker who knew something very, very useful. Every night, a Royal Mail train ran from Glasgow to London, carrying bags of cash from Scottish banks. And after a bank holiday weekend, that train would be carrying way more money than usual. So the gang picked their night, August 8th, 1963. Their target, the Glasgow to London mail train, somewhere in the fields of Buckinghamshire. Now, robbing a moving train sounds like something out of a Western. So how do you actually stop one in the middle of the night in rural England? You cheat. The gang rigged the railway signal near a spot called Sears Crossing. They covered the green light and wired in their own battery-powered red light. Simple, cheap, effective. The train saw red and did exactly what trains are supposed to do when they see red. The driver, a career railwayman named Jack Mills, stopped the train and sent his assistant to go check the signal by hand, because that's the actual procedure. That assistant found the gang waiting for him. Within minutes, the gang stormed the train. Here's the part that isn't funny. Jack Mills was hit on the head during the struggle. He was knocked out, needed stitches, and by most accounts never fully recovered. His health declined for years afterward. We're going to keep the jokes coming in this video, because a lot of this story genuinely is absurd. But that moment wasn't a joke to the people who lived it, worth remembering. With Mills forced to help, the gang detached the engine and the first two carriages, the ones packed with mail sacks, and moved them half a mile down the track to a bridge, Bridego Bridge, where the rest of the crew was waiting with a truck. Then it was just an assembly line. Mailbag after mailbag after mailbag, hand to hand, down the embankment, into the truck. They loaded 120 bags, about 2.5 tons of cash, in under 20 minutes. Before they left, the gang gave the train crew one instruction: don't move or call anyone for 30 minutes. And then they just drove off into the English night with roughly 2.6 million pounds, somewhere north of 50 million pounds today. Clean getaway. Textbook. This is the part of the movie where the credits usually roll. Unfortunately for them, this was real life, and real life has a second act. The plan was simple. Lay low at a hideout called Leatherslade Farm for a few weeks until the heat died down, then quietly disperse the cash. Reportedly, some of them passed the time playing Monopoly, using the real stolen cash instead of the game's money, because apparently irony wasn't invented yet. Then they heard on the radio that police were combing the entire region for the hideout. Panic set in. And here's where the criminal masterminds branding takes a hit. They fled the farm and did a genuinely rushed, sloppy job of wiping it down. When police found the place days later, it was a fingerprint buffet. Dozens of prints, all over furniture, bottles, board games, you name it. Within weeks, Scotland Yard had names. Within months, most of the gang was arrested. In 1964, at trial, several of them were handed sentences of around 30 years, genuinely harsher than some murder sentences of that era, which caused real public debate at the time about whether the punishment fit the crime. Now, remember Ronnie Biggs, the locksmith I mentioned who barely did anything during the actual robbery? This is where he becomes the most famous name in the entire story, and it has almost nothing to do with the heist itself. In 1965, 15 months into his 30-year sentence, Biggs climbed over the wall of Wandsworth Prison using a rope ladder and a furniture van parked outside as a landing pad. Clean escape. What followed was one of the great fugitive tours of the 20th century. Plastic surgery in Paris, years hiding in Australia, and finally, Brazil, where Biggs settled for good, because Brazil had no extradition treaty with the UK at the time, and, this is real, Biggs fathered a Brazilian son, which under local law made him even harder to extract. For over 36 years, Ronnie Biggs lived as a free man in Rio de Janeiro. He gave interviews, he sold merchandise, he became something between a folk hero and a punchline. The guy who robbed a train and then just retired to the beach. Here's the strange twist. Biggs became more famous for escaping than the actual masterminds became for planning the robbery. Bruce Reynolds, the guy who organized the whole thing, is barely a household name by comparison. Biggs got the merchandise deal. That's just how folklore works sometimes. In 2001, after a series of strokes left him in poor health, Biggs voluntarily returned to Britain, reportedly because he wanted proper medical care and, in his own words at the time, wanted to walk into a Margate pub as an Englishman. He was arrested the moment he landed and sent back to prison. He was released on compassionate grounds in 2009 and died in 2013 at 84 years old. And the money? Only a small fraction was ever recovered. Most of that £2.6 million simply vanished, spent, buried, laundered, lost to decades of legal fees and life on the run. Several gang members later admitted the fortune brought them more grief than joy. Divided assets, blown court costs, years in prison, lives spent looking over their shoulders. And Jack Mills, the driver who was struck that night, he never received a reward. His health issues persisted for years, and he passed away in 1970. It's easy to get swept up in the lovable rogues framing of this story, and pop culture absolutely has. But there was a real victim at the center of it. So that's the Great Train Robbery, a meticulously planned crime undone by a monopoly board. A minor player who became the most famous fugitive in Britain, and a heist that, more than 60 years later, is still one of the most talked about crimes in British history, inspiring books, films, and TV series ever since. Turns out the hardest part of a heist was never the robbery. It was the cleanup. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for more true stories that sound too ridiculous to be real, and let me know in the comments which heist you want covered next.